Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I bought this property 3 years back thinking the quiet dirt road would be perfect for my line of work. Running a towing company means odd hours and quick responses, so having space and easy access was non-negotiable. The neighbors seemed friendly enough when I moved in. We'd wave at each other, make small talk about the weather, nothing fancy, but cordial. My property sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, down a narrow dirt road that's barely wide enough for two cars to pass. When it rains like it had been this week, the shoulders turn into a slick mess of clay and mud. Even my four-wheel drive struggles sometimes. I've got signs posted clearly stating no parking and not to block my driveway. It's not being difficult, it's practical. The neighbor throws parties sometimes. Friday nights in rural Virginia can get rowdy, and I don't mind people having fun. Noise doesn't bother me much. I work strange hours anyway, so I'm often up when everyone else is sleeping. The arrangement was simple. Party all you want, just don't block my way out. Earlier that evening, around 6 or 7, I noticed cars starting to line the road. I walked over and found my neighbor setting up for what looked like a big gathering. I kept it friendly and gave her a heads up that I was on call tonight for the state police rotation. I said to party all she wanted, but asked that nobody block the road or my driveway since I might need to leave on short notice. She said it wouldn't be a problem and that she'd tell everyone. I thanked her and headed back home. That should have been the end of it. I went back home, made dinner, watched some television. Around midnight my phone rang. It was my boss asking if I could head to the shop and warm up the rotator and the light-duty flatbed since we might have a job coming in. I said I'd be there in 20 minutes. I figured if I was going to be up anyway, I might as well stay at the shop and clean some equipment. Keep myself busy. I threw on my boots, grabbed my gear, and headed for my car. When I saw it, my driveway was completely blocked. Not by one or two vehicles, but by at least 15 trucks and cars parked every which way. Some were on the road, some half in the ditch, others crammed together like a jigsaw puzzle. There was no way I was getting out without moving at least 10 of them. I took a breath and walked over to my neighbor's place. The music was thumping loud enough to rattle windows. People were everywhere, most of them looking barely old enough to drive. When I got close to the house, some guy I'd never seen before stepped in front of me and demanded to know what I was doing on his property. I said I lived next door and was looking for the homeowner. He said she was busy and to get lost. I walked past him. I wasn't in the mood. I found my neighbor inside near the kitchen, laughing with a group of people. I tapped her shoulder and explained that I needed someone to move the cars blocking my driveway because I had to get to work. She didn't even turn down the music, just sort of mumbled toward the crowd that whoever was blocking the driveway next door should move their trucks. Then she shut the door in my face. I stood there for a second, then knocked again. She opened it, clearly annoyed, and said something about me being a witch again. I tried one more time to explain that I was on call and really needed to get out. She waved a beer can at me, sloshing liquid onto the porch, and said it was a party and to relax. She slammed the door again. I heard her yell inside some nasty slur about me. When I turned to leave, the same guy from before threw his beer can at me. It hit my shoulder. He laughed and told me I better leave and to get going. I smiled, walked back home, got on the phone. I called our dispatch first and said to get me every available truck that night because I had private property impounds waiting. Lots of them. The dispatcher asked how many we were talking about. I estimated around 15, maybe more. They said they were on it. Then I called police dispatch and requested an officer just in case things escalated. Within 20 minutes, a patrol car rolled up. Shortly after, my drivers started arriving. 10 trucks total. We got to work. The officers stood nearby when we hooked up vehicle after vehicle. Some of the partygoers started noticing, stumbling out to see what was happening. A few shouted, but nobody tried anything stupid with the cop standing right there. We were down to the last 3 vehicles when things got interesting. The owner of a yellow Civic sprinted out, jumped in, and peeled off down the road. The owner of a gold Silverado, a young woman who could barely stand, tried to drive off too. She got stuck immediately, tires spinning in the mud, tearing up my yard even worse. The officer walked over to her. She started screaming at him, slurring her words badly. He arrested her on the spot for underage drinking and driving under the influence. The old Ford truck owner never showed up, so we towed it too. By 2 in the morning, all the vehicles were at the impound yard. I brought coffee and snacks for my drivers. They'd earned it. I made sure to write a special note on every single impound sheet thanking the girl who threw the party for getting everyone towed. The next day wasn't a business day, which meant retrieval fees stacked up. Regular impound fee of $289.50. 2 days of storage at $55 per day. And since people would be picking up after hours, a $100 gate fee to cover the overtime for office staff who had to come in specially. The phone started ringing around noon. Parents. Angry parents demanding to know where their kids' vehicles were. I gave them the impound yard address and said they could come anytime. They started shouting about illegal tows and threatening to call their lawyers. I explained that I had photos of every vehicle with the no parking signs clearly visible in the background. I said I had tried asking the property owner to have the vehicles moved, but she refused and was tired of being blocked in by drunk teenagers. There was usually a pause when they asked who the property owner was, and I said it was me. Most of them just went quiet and hung up. A few came by the yard to argue in person, but the photos and documentation shut them down fast. The signs were right there in every picture. No parking. Do not block driveway. All clearly posted on my private road. One parent tried to argue that the signs were invisible enough. I showed them a photo where their kid's truck was parked directly beneath one of the signs. They left without another word. Another parent claimed their son didn't know it was private property. I asked them if the dead-end dirt road with multiple private property signs gave them any indication. They didn't have much to say after that. My neighbor hasn't thrown a party since, and nobody parks on my road anymore. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when it costs people nearly $500 to learn a lesson. About a week later, when I saw my neighbor outside, she wouldn't even make eye contact. Just hurried back inside when she saw me coming up my driveway. No more slamming doors in my face. No more slurs yelled across yards. I did get one apologetic phone call from a parent whose daughter had been at the party but hadn't parked on my property. She wanted to know if there was any way to reduce the fees since her daughter hadn't been one of the ones blocking me in. I explained that every vehicle towed was documented with photos showing exactly where it was parked. If her daughter's car wasn't blocking the road or my driveway, it wouldn't have been towed. She went quiet and then admitted her daughter had lied about where she parked. I said the fees stood and ended the call. The local police dispatcher I'd worked with that night called me a few days later just to check in. She'd heard through the grapevine that there were some angry parents making noise about the tows. I said everything was documented and legal. She laughed and said she figured as much, but wanted to give me a heads up in case anyone tried to make an official complaint. Nobody ever did. The girl who got arrested for the DUI had her court date about a month later. I didn't have to testify since the officer's report was enough, but I heard she lost her license for a year and had to do community service. Her parents tried to blame me for ruining her future. I didn't lose any sleep over it. She made her choices. My drivers still joke about that night. They call it the party massacre. We'd never done that many impounds from one location in a single night before. It was smooth though. Everyone knew their job and we had it done in under 2 hours. The towing business teaches you pretty quickly that people don't like what happens when they break the rules. They'll park wherever is convenient, block whoever they want, and assume nothing will happen. Then when it does, suddenly it's unfair. Suddenly the rules don't apply to them. Suddenly they've got lawyers and threats. But the law is the law. Private property is private property. And when you're in the business of knowing those laws inside and out, you don't get intimidated by empty threats. I still see some of those kids around town sometimes. They look away when they spot me. If you have actually waved, which surprised me. Maybe they learned something. Maybe they just don't want any more trouble. Either way, my driveway stays clear now. Don't make an enemy out of a tow truck driver. We know the laws better than you do, and we've got the trucks to back it up. I volunteered part-time at a local park doing basic maintenance and light security work. The park stretched across several acres with a jungle gym area tucked behind a wall of trees in the back section. One afternoon during my rounds, I spotted fresh tire tracks cutting straight through the grass near the back exit. The weather had been cold and rainy for days, leaving the ground muddy and soft. Whoever drove through had left deep ruts in the turf. The thing is, the turn coming out from that area wasn't sharp or confusing. You could clearly see the paved path. I snapped some photos and called my supervisor. He agreed it looked bad and said we'd fix it once the weather warmed up later that week. It should be an easy job to repair. 2 days later, I was near the front entrance when I caught movement from the corner of my eye. A minivan rolled up from the back area and drove directly through the same damaged spot. I jogged toward the vehicle, waving my arms to get the driver's attention. The van stopped and the window rolled down. The woman wore oversized sunglasses that covered half her face. 2 kids sat in the back seats, both absorbed in tablets. She asked me what I wanted in an annoyed tone. I explained that I worked at the park and she'd just driven through the grass, which damages it easily when the ground is wet like this. She responded with a flat, okay, like she didn't care at all. Her tone caught me off guard. No apology, no acknowledgement that she'd done anything wrong. I told her we'd have to replace the grass and asked her to be more careful when leaving from the back area, saying I understood if it was a mistake. Even with the sunglasses hiding most of her expression, I could tell she was looking at me with anger. She muttered whatever in a rude voice, then rolled up her window and drove off before I could respond. I stood there stunned at how dismissive she'd been. A few days passed. My supervisor and I spent the morning fixing the damaged area. We flattened the torn-up ground, mixed in fresh topsoil, and laid down new grass seed. The patch looked better than it had before. I felt satisfied with our work. That afternoon during my patrol, I noticed the same minivan parked in the back lot. I headed to the jungle gym and found the woman sitting on a bench, scrolling through her phone while her kids played. Part of me hoped she'd learned her lesson, but based on our previous interaction, I had serious doubts. I made a few loops around the back section, picking up scattered candy wrappers and checking that everything was in order. When I saw her gathering up the kids to leave, I sprinted to the front entrance. I positioned myself near the exit and pulled my sunglasses from my fanny pack, hoping she wouldn't recognize me. Maybe she'd drive more carefully if she thought park staff was watching. The minivan appeared, rolling toward the exit. My jaw dropped when she steered straight through the freshly seated area we'd just finished that morning. The tires tore right through our work. I was furious now. I walked into the middle of the pavement and stood there until she stopped. She rolled down her window with an annoyed expression. She demanded to know what I wanted, sounding really annoyed. I told her she'd driven over that section again and we'd fixed it just that morning. She asked so what, saying it was just grass and we should pave the whole area so people wouldn't drive over it. I explained that she could see the grass clearly when coming from the back, that it doesn't appear out of nowhere, and that nobody else had ever driven through there except her. I tried to keep my frustration in check, but my voice had an edge to it. The kids in the back seat remained glued to their tablets, only looking up when they heard their mother curse. She gave me one final nasty look and rolled up her window without responding. Then she hit the gas before I'd stepped back. The van lurched forward and nearly ran over my foot. That pushed me over the edge. I called my supervisor immediately and told him she'd done it again, driving right through the area we'd fixed that morning and nearly running over my foot. He sounded pretty angry over the phone but said he had a plan to stop this permanently. Friday morning arrived and my supervisor pulled up in his pickup truck. In the bed sat an enormous boulder, roughly 3 feet tall and probably weighing several hundred pounds. He said we should put it right in that spot so she wouldn't be driving through grass anymore. I instantly knew what we were doing with it. We spent the next hour unloading the boulder, digging out enough space, and wedging it into the ground where she kept driving. It was an eyesore, and I felt bad that our landscaping work had been for nothing. But at least this would solve the problem. Later that day, I was in the back area emptying trash bins when the familiar minivan pulled into the parking lot. I recognized the license plate. I continued my work, satisfied knowing she couldn't damage that section anymore. Eventually, I moved to the front where I was scrubbing bird droppings off a decorative statue. A loud crashing sound echoed from the entrance area. I ran toward the noise and stopped dead when I saw the scene. The minivan sat at an awkward angle with a massive boulder wedged between the front tire and bumper. The wheel hung slightly off the ground while the front bumper rested on top of the rock. I honestly had no idea how she'd managed to hit it so perfectly. She climbed out of the van swearing and shouting. I did feel a pang of guilt seeing the damage, even though she brought this entirely on herself. When she spotted me, her face turned red. She yelled at me, stomping over and asking if I'd put that rock there while calling me a jerk. I explained that my supervisor had placed the boulder there that morning because she kept driving over the grass, and I didn't understand how she'd even hit it, since she could see it clearly coming from the back. She shouted that she'd been texting her friend and I was going to pay for the damage. I told her I didn't think so. She stormed back to her van, had her kids get out and sit at a nearby picnic table, then got on her phone. A few minutes later, she said she'd called the police and I was going to be arrested for intentionally damaging her property. My stomach tightened. Whatever story she'd fed them probably wasn't accurate. I called my supervisor again. He arrived before the police did, laughing, when he pulled up and surveyed the situation. He approached the woman and introduced himself as the park supervisor. She immediately started screaming about lawsuits and having both of us arrested for the damage. 2 officers arrived shortly after. She told them we deliberately placed the boulder to destroy her vehicle. My supervisor explained the situation, how she'd repeatedly driven through the grass despite warnings, how we'd repaired it twice, and how the boulder was placed to protect park property. I showed them photos of the previous damage on my phone. The officers spoke with us separately, then told the woman we had every right to place the boulder on park property and weren't responsible for her careless driving. Frustrated, she told her kids to get back in the van and started backing off the boulder. The 3 of us stood there watching when the rock scraped along the undercarriage with a horrible grinding sound. When the van finally cleared the boulder, the front bumper crashed down onto the pavement, now hanging loose on the left side. Something underneath was also dragging when she tried to drive away, creating a terrible scraping noise. The officers stopped her immediately and explained that her vehicle wasn't safe to drive and she'd need to call a tow truck. My supervisor and I left shortly after, grinning at each other the whole drive home. I'm pretty confident she won't be driving through that grass ever again. I pulled into the parking lot at 6 in the morning like I always do. The sun was barely up and the store lights were the brightest thing around. I needed my coffee before heading to physical therapy. Same routine every day for the past few months since the accident left me, was this walker and a permanent limp. The injury happened at work. I was on a construction site when some equipment fell the wrong way, crushed my hip and left leg pretty bad. The doctors said I was lucky to walk at all, even if it meant using this walker for the rest of my life. I was 42 years old and suddenly had to relearn how to do everything. Getting in and out of the car took planning. Walking across a parking lot was a whole production. And don't even get me started on curbs. Those things became my worst enemy. That's why the handicap spot mattered so much. It wasn't about being lazy or wanting convenience. It was about being able to get into the store without risking a fall or spending 20 minutes struggling with a 6-inch curb. The regular spots were too far from the entrance, and the curb there was higher. But today someone was parked in the only handicap spot. No placard on the mirror, no license plate marking. Just a regular car sitting there like it belonged. I circled around and waited near the entrance, engine running. A few minutes later, a woman came out of the store with a bottle of water and a bag of chips. She looked perfectly healthy. No cane, no limp, nothing. She walked like someone who had never given a second thought to whether she could make it across a parking lot. She got in the car and started backing out. That's when I moved. I pulled forward and stopped right behind her, close enough that she couldn't finish backing up. Then I shifted into park and turned off the engine. She stopped her car and sat there for a second. Then I saw her door open and she got out, walking over to my window with her hands up. She demanded to know what I was doing and yelled that I'd blocked her car. I rolled down the window slowly, taking my time. I told her she didn't seem to be handicapped, so I was taking the spot. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off with a question that made the air between us go cold. I asked if she wanted to be handicapped. The question hung there. Her mouth snapped shut and her eyes went wide. For a second, she just stared at me like she couldn't process what I'd said. She screamed at me to just move my car. I told her no. I opened my door and pulled out my walker. She stepped back when I unfolded it and locked it into place. My hip screamed when I shifted my weight onto my good leg and grabbed the walker handles. Every movement was slow and deliberate because it had to be. One wrong step and I'd be on the ground. She kept yelling that I couldn't just block her in, asking if I was serious. I didn't answer. I just started making my way toward the store entrance, one shuffle at a time. The walker scraped against the pavement with each step. Behind me, I could hear her yelling something, but I wasn't listening anymore. The automatic doors slid open and the familiar smell of coffee and hot food hit me. The cashier looked up from his phone and grinned when he saw me. He asked if it was a rough morning, and I told him he could say that. He asked if I wanted my usual, and I said yes, but to throw in a bagel too because I was going to eat it there. He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. He'd seen me around enough times to know I wasn't usually in a chatty mood. But today felt different. Today I had time. I paid for my coffee and bagel and moved over to the small counter by the window. From there I had a perfect view of the parking lot. The woman was still standing by her car, phone pressed to her ear. Probably calling someone to complain. Maybe even the police. Let her call. I took my time with that bagel. Cream cheese on both sides, heated up just right. I ate it slowly, washing it down with sips of coffee. The cashier came over at one point with a newspaper that had just been delivered. He said he thought I might want something to read, and I thanked him. I spread the paper out on the counter and started with the sports section. My old team had lost again. Figured. I moved on to local news, then the classifieds, just because I could. Every few minutes, I'd look out the window. The woman had gotten back in her car at some point, but she was still trapped there. I could see her gripping the steering wheel. The cashier and I talked about the weather, about the road work that was tearing up Main Street, about whether the diner down the block was ever going to reopen. Just normal stuff. Time kept passing. When I finally folded up the newspaper, a full 30 minutes had gone by. My hip was starting to stiffen up from sitting, which meant it was time to get moving toward therapy anyway. I stood up carefully and grabbed my walker. The cashier told me to have a good one, and I said I always do. I made my way back outside. The woman was still in her car, and the second she saw me coming, her door flew open. She asked if I had any idea how long she'd been waiting, her voice sharp and angry. I told her it was probably about the same time it takes someone like me to walk from a regular parking spot. I got in my car and started the engine. She was still standing there when I slowly backed up and pulled away. I adjusted my rearview mirror and saw her racing to get back in her car. I drove to physical therapy with my coffee still warm. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.